The XMV multivariable transmitter is a 2-wire RS-485 Modbus device. It requires less than 12 milliamps to operate and can be powered by a Totalflow G3 and G4 series with 12 volts. The XMV works by measuring static pressure, differential pressure, and process temperature, and then communicating these readings via RS-485 bus to the Totalflow X series device. Let's take a look at the hardware on the ABB multivariable. On the front you can see we have a display with a cover. We have 2 ports on the side, which we can put our RTD and our wiring. Around the back we have our terminations. Let's unscrew this cover. RTD here and here. Our power and RS-485 bus there. On the top of the unit we have our push buttons in which we can set up the unit. As you can see, we have plus and minus, backwards and forwards. We operate the programming just by pressing down, up and down with the screwdriver. The scenario we will explore today in the video will be to use the XFC onboard transmitter to be our tube 1 and the XMV to be our tube 2. If you look at the diagram, the actual meter run in red is going to be for our onboard XFC, and the meter run in green will be our XMV, and they'll be connected by an XMV interface on COM2. Now let's take a look at the wiring between the XMV and the XFC board. As you can see from the wiring diagram, first we'll start with the XFC side. As you can see from the diagram, we have bus plus and minus and power connections. Also notice that we need a COM2 module placed into the COM2 module slot on the board of the XFC. Now let's move over to the XMV itself, and notice we have the same connections, bus plus and bus minus, power plus and minus. Also notice from the text that if this is the last XMV in the series of XMVs, if there are multiples, we need to apply this 120 ohm resistor to the last XMV, as the note states. Finally, let's take a look at the RTD connections for the XMV. As you can see from our diagram, the black wires go on the right together and the white wires from the RTD go on the left. Also note that we need to remove the 178 ohm resistor that's on the unit when we get it from the factory, and also there's a jumper wire on each side. We need to take those off. This concludes our wiring. Now let's look into the actual setup of the XMV using our push buttons. If we look at the top of the unit, we can see there's 3 buttons on top. One is for the back cursor, one is to go forward, and one is the mode. The table you see here represents the setup parameters within the XMV as set with the factory. This should be fine for the scenario we are looking at with a single XMV. Notice the bus address is set to 1, and we need to pay particular interest to that to make sure that is correct. To set up the XMV, let's take a look at the push buttons on the top of the unit. What we want to do first is we notice it's scrolling right now. We want to get it into the exit mode. We do that by selecting this top right key, pressing it 1 time, and we go to exit. Now to scroll to the other parameters, we move over 1 to the center position, and we simply toggle it till we get to the proper parameter that we want. In this case, we're going to go to baud rate. Now once in baud rate, we go back to the right, we enter into that one. We can see that it's set on 9600. Suppose we wanted to scroll to another parameter, we would move back to the center. You can see it's scrolling through the different baud rates. Let's leave it on 9600. Go back to the right, say OK. Go back to baud rate. Now let's go to the center. Scroll back to our exit. Push the right key. And now we should be scrolling normally on the display. Now that the XMV is set up properly, let's go into the XFC and set it up with PCCU. First, we go ahead and normally connect. Going to our top menu, we're going to need to turn on an application for another measurement tube and also the XMV application. Let's set up an AGA3 tube under 12. And let's scroll down to 41. Put in our XMV application. Let's send that. As we can see, we have our second tube at 12 and our XMV interface now at 41. If we look over now in the tree, we can see that we have AGA 3-2 and we also have an XMV interface. Since we now have an additional tube, AGA 3 number 2, we need to set up displays for this additional tube that we just set up. Notice we just have display for AGA 3-1. To set up an additional display, let's go into Save and Restore Utility. Let's look at the files that are in display currently. Notice we have the original one, AGA 3-1. Let's double click on that. We're going to go to File, Send As. What we're going to do is call this we're going to say OK. Now we're going to go in and edit this file to make it tube number 2. First we go to the group description to make sure we change that so that makes sense. AGA 3-2. Say OK. Let's go in and change this to tube 2. Let's click on this area here. Move this up 1 to account for our second tube. Say OK. Go down to orifice, same thing, we do tube 2. This is going to be at the 12 application. Say OK. So we would do this all the way down to the bottom of the list, and then when we're through we would say send. Now we can see we have it in our list. Now let's close this. Before these changes will take effect, we need to warm boot the XFC. So let's do that by just simply taking the power on and off quickly. Once we've done the warm boot, let's check and make sure that our displays are correct. Let's go into Display, go down to AGA 3-2, and we can see we have all our displays there, similar to the first tube. So this all should be correct now. Let's verify quickly that everything is correct now in our setup for the XMV. Let's go into Entry. Let's look underneath the XMV interface. Let's go into our XMV1, which is our XMV app. Let's go to the Values tab. Notice we are getting a success here, which means our communication between the XMV and the XFC is working fine. Also notice here's our live values we're getting from the XMV. Differential pressure, static pressure, and temperature. We can do a reread to watch these values update. Also notice the app array registers of differential pressure, static pressure, and temperature. These need to be the same in our AGA 3-2 measurement tube. 41205-0 is DP, .1 is static, and .2 is temperature. So let's now go to our AGA 3-2 tube, go to the Advanced tab. Now let's make sure that these are correct. DP is at 0, static pressure is .1, and .2 was at temperature. So this all seems to be fine. This concludes the video for the ABB XMV. As we've seen in the video, you can connect quite easily to the G4 device with the standard factory default settings for the XFC as well as the XMV. If you need additional information concerning the ABB XMV, don't hesitate to go to the help files, where you can find lots of help for mechanical installations as well as setup for the XMV. For more in-depth information, you can consult our ABB multivariable manual. You can get this on the website or through one of our customer service representatives. As always, thanks for listening.